few moments ago when I looked in that back pew back there, and Mark is not there. We've had a number of funerals just in the last 2 weeks. Jamie Byers, who is a part of our church, but his mom passed away, and I did that funeral. And then I got the word that Norma Tannenberger had passed away. And then Mark was taken in such an untimely way, unpredicted all completely. And so those things happen, and we grieve about that. And it's interesting to me that the text that Peggy read this morning is sort of sandwiched between two funerals. The Bible had funerals too. They had weddings and funerals. In fact, chapter 12 of John is right after chapter 11, in which was the amazing raising of Lazarus from the dead. And then the next few chapters is about the crucifixion and the funeral of Jesus and all the mourning that happened there. Both of these deaths were tragic, one by sickness, one by cruelty and injustice. But both ended in a reversal of death, because this is what the good news is all about. Now, the book of John, 21 chapters, but it's divided into two sections, and some scholars tell us the book of John is actually two books kind of put together. The first book, they say, is the book of signs. Chapters 1 through 12 is the book of signs, so we're at the last chapter of the book of signs. And then it sort of changes pace from chapter 13 to 21 is the book of glory. It's almost a paradox. How can it be glory? That Jesus is going to reveal the fullness of his glory through the death and the crucifixion and the resurrection. But that first part of the book of John is chapters 1 through 12 is the book of signs. There are 7 signs, if you want to do a little Bible study and go through it. In chapter 2, Jesus turned the water into wine. Ever since then, Methodists have been turning wine into grape juice, but that was what Jesus did, was turn water into wine. Chapter 2, it said this was the first of his signs. It had some more teaching, some more interaction with people. Chapter 4, Jesus healed a royal official's son. A sickness was healed. In chapter 5, Jesus healed the man by the pool of Bethesda. The crippled man had been crippled for 38 years. In chapter 6, Jesus feeds the 5,000. And all of these were signs. That word sign appears all over the Gospel of John. In chapter 6, Jesus walked on water, an amazing miracle of Jesus. In chapter 6, Jesus healed a man who had been born blind, as a way of saying, when the gospel comes, the eyes are really open. But in chapter 11 was the most amazing sign, was when Lazarus had died. Lazarus, Jesus' very good friend, Mary and Martha, the two sisters, Jesus had waited and waited. When they said, Lazarus is sick, and if you will just come, you can heal him. And he waited and waited, and then Lazarus died. And when Jesus went there, Mary and Martha were distraught. They were beside themselves. They said, "Oh Lord, if you had only been here, you could have done something about it, but now it's too late." And Jesus said, "Don't you know that Lazarus will rise again?" They said, "Oh, I believe it will happen in the last day. I believe it will happen." And Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, yet shall they live. Whoever lives and believes in me shall never die." And you know the outcome of that amazing sign that was sort of a spoiler alert about what was going to happen to Jesus. Lazarus rose from the dead. It was an amazing. People's minds were blown. They began to follow Jesus, but dark clouds were also gathering because the religious leaders who felt threatened, they said, "How can we take this Jesus out? Everybody's following him, and while we're doing it, let's take out Lazarus." Maybe Jesus had had a very elaborate hoax, is what they think. Maybe he played like he was dead, and they did this whole thing of rolling back the stone and letting Lazarus come out. That's what the religious leaders thought as they began to hatch a plot of how they could kill Jesus. Well, Nicodemus stood up for Jesus. He was the one in chapter 3 of John that had said, "We know you're a teacher from God." And Jesus had talked to him about the new birth. Nicodemus had stood up, but Caiaphas, the high priest, got up and it said, "Don't you understand that it's better that one man die than the whole nation perish?" And it said that even though he wasn't a man of God, even though he was in that position, he was actually prophesying very true words. Jesus would perish so that we could all find life. Right after this event, when they're hatching a plot for how can they get rid of Jesus and possibly take out Lazarus too, to stop all the popularity and all the faith around Jesus, it pauses to let us have a little meal. Jesus, Lazarus at table, Mary and Martha, people standing around outside. Jesus is reclining as they did in the Middle East. And then there's an amazing thing that happens. I want a couple of kids to come up here. Let me see. Leanna, could you come? And where's Drew? Drew is supposed to be here too, helping me. Where's Drew?
She's out right now.
She fled the scene? Okay. Celine, you can come help. I've got something here. I want you to go kind of pass these out. You can go over here and pass one every couple of aisles down. And I want you to smell this thing and pass it on. Pass those things out. This is what spikenard smells like. I've got a little vial. Nard. There was Jesus eating. Martha was serving, as Martha was known to do. Lazarus was there. Many people were present. And Mary comes through the doors. And she brought a very expensive perfume in an alabaster box. It would have been almost a life savings. This stuff is not cheap. Did you get to smell it? It came over? It came over there, so you already smelled it, right? Did you like it? It's not really that wonderful of a smell, is it? But she brought about half a liter. The estimated cost for that little jar was a whole year's wages. That is extravagant. And what did she do with it? She opened the seal and she poured out the pure nard on Jesus' feet. And then she began to weep. And then she began to wipe them dry with her hair. It was an extravagant waste, excessive, but a demonstration of the deep affection. It was way over the top. And this occurred near the time of Passover, when Jewish pilgrims came from all over the world and all over the empire to celebrate the feast. And during these days, Jews were especially supposed to be caring of the poor. In other words, you come together and you help any of the poor people that are around Jerusalem. You're there for the Passover feast. But one disciple, that it tells us, Judas, took offense at this holy waste. He rebuked the woman for pouring out a life savings. Why wasn't this perfume sold, the money given to the poor? It's worth a whole year's wages. It makes sense, doesn't it? Well, it said he really didn't care about the poor. It said he was a thief. He was the one about to take 30 pieces of silver and betray Jesus. But that was a lot of money and would do more good if it was sold and the proceeds were dedicated elsewhere. And I can see his point. The other gospel writers didn't blame just Judas. They said some of the disciples were saying that, so apparently some other ones agreed with Judas. But Jesus saw through and saw a greater significance of what Mary was doing. Actually, she was just showing her love and the way that she could. And what do? You give something wonderful. We often take house gifts to people, home gifts, when we go over to their houses. And we give gifts at Christmas and birthday to show, even people who have everything they need, we give something to show our love. She was trying to give love to Jesus. But Jesus saw more significance in what Mary was doing, more than she could even see. No one understood what was really going on in her act of love and devotion. Jesus saw something more profound in that practice. And so he came to her defense with very stern words. Leave her alone. It was intended that this perfume would be for the day of my burial. This is an amazing thing, because Mary didn't realize she was doing a prophetic act in putting the spikenard on Jesus' feet, wiping them with her hair. It said the whole room was filled with that aroma. She was actually doing a predictive act. Now, the disciples sat there with a dot on their head. They didn't know what was going on. Jesus knew he is about to face betrayal, denial, a trial, torture, and crucifixion. The disciples had no idea. They thought they'd come to Jerusalem, and pretty soon he would declare himself king. They would get rid of Pontius Pilate, get rid of Herod, the evil king. They would set up the kingdom of God, and they would be the ones that would be in charge. James and John had even asked Jesus, when you come to your kingdom, can we sit on your left and your right hand? They were clueless about what was really going on. Jesus, in Mark 14:6, adds another phrase. He said, what she's done is a beautiful thing. She's poured out this oil, this spikenard. He also said, he called Judas's hand. Yes, it's true. You can help the poor. We should help the poor. We ought to be about the work of helping the poor. He said, but the poor you have always. This is a unique time in history. You don't have me always. And so she has done what she could, but she didn't even know it. She's anointing me in advance for my burial. So what appeared as a profligate waste and a useless gesture of squandering good resources, Jesus saw as something else. He accepted her gift as an extravagant, holy waste, lavished outpouring of love. And so I hope that always our gifts, our giving, our dedication of our time and our resources will reflect such an attitude of love and devotion. It's not to make us look good. It's not just to get off of taxes. It's because we love Jesus. May we offer our extravagant holy waste as an outpouring of love on that crucified one, that poor man of Nazareth, the one who bore the cross and the grave for us and for our salvation. Mary made a remarkable act of love and devotion. And she was criticized. And the church is often criticized. I have a person that I'm writing to named Hope. She is not a Christian. In fact, she's an atheist. And she writes on the Facebook. And she wrote this to me. Just listen to this honest communication, but her beef about the church. She writes, Kim, there was a time when I believed in something, and I even went to church every Sunday and took my children. A friend of mine is her husband, Chris, and I continued to go to a huge church here in Georgia run by a certain person. Perhaps you've heard of him. Anyway, the straw man that broke the camel's back for me was the BS he spewed about homosexuality and abortions. I was so angry during these indoctrinations that I finally said, enough is enough. There were many, many other things that made me nauseous about the Christian faith. However, the biggest problem for me is that the whole concept is a problem for me. Meaning, I finally had to admit to myself and to Chris, I just can't pretend to believe in something that was designed to destroy one group of people over another. Where money is taken from desperately poor people so others can associate with the church, can live lavishly. I have seen the con over and over. Although you may say, don't shoot the messenger. Well, there are millions of people following those messengers. It's an honest and almost bitter. And whenever she writes with a little bit of snarkiness. And I try to absorb that. So I'd just like to give you my answer to her. I said, Hope, I share much of the same frustrations as you about the distortions of religion when religious values get hawked as a means of profit. Honestly, I know very few ministers who live lavishly. The ones who live that way are usually high-profile televangelists who promote a particular perversion of Christianity. Religion as a means of gain is deplorable. So Jesus warned about that, and in so doing fell afoul of the religious establishment of his day, and we know where that ended. But most of my colleague ministers serve humbly and self-sacrificially while living on very modest incomes. Pensions are abysmal and retirement a challenge. Churches generally pay substandard salaries and stipends. I want to say this one does not. Some ministers have other jobs to supplement their salary and depend on working spouses. My first year of ministry required me to work a second job driving a school bus, and my wife to work as a Winn-Dixie checker just to pay bills and put food on the table. While it is true that a few religious functionaries operate in exploitative ways and fleece the flock, they're not the majority. However, Hollywood and athletic celebrities and some politicians and CEOs bag 6, 7, and 8-digit incomes, and few bat an eye. And they take from the poor as well. Perhaps that upsets you too. We have very skewed values as a nation. The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, stated one writer in the New Testament. Jesus taught that it's very difficult for a rich person to enter God's kingdom. That was the camel passing through the eye of the needle thing. I'm also disturbed and heartsick about how some preachers speak about the LGBT community. My congregation includes several same-gendered families, and we welcome and treat them as anyone else for the love of God. We practice open hearts, open minds, and open doors. Abortion is another issue that the church struggles with, and there are no simple and slam-dunk answers. That's an area for fruitful dialogue. So I don't mind genuine conversation on any matter of ethical and moral importance. What happens too often, though, is a conversation descends into anger, name-calling, snarkiness, and denigrating mutual polarization. The conversation goes off the rails and no helpful learning occurs. No meeting of minds, no understanding. Emotional reasoning cleps cognitive reasoning, and everyone just leaves mad. I never mind if an atheist, an agnostic, a communist, a fundamentalist, or liberal Christian, or a person of another religion questions or even objects passionately to my faith commitments. But I wonder what turmoil resides in their hearts and minds when they regard my faith with anger and express disdain towards my convictions. I hope always to regard their viewpoint with respect and appreciative inquiry. It goes much further than rancor. Don't you agree? Well, people get a bug in their bonnet, a bee in their bonnet about these things. The church can be wasteful. The church can be exploitive. But the fact is, when we give to the Lord, whether it's our time, our energy, our resources, our money, can we have that attitude that Mary had, that was willing to pour out an extravagant, holy waste because of the love of Jesus? Oh yeah, the poor you have always with you. We can help them, and we should. We didn't always have Jesus. In that special case, Mary was showing her deep love. And you know what happened? And she took that nard and she put it on his feet. And she began to wipe it with her hair. She began to smell like Jesus. That aroma was on her. And it said that aroma filled the entire room. Isn't that what loving Jesus should do to us? We come away smelling like Jesus. Can you say amen?
Amen.
Let's prepare.